Excellent. Good evening. Welcome to a regular meeting of the Programs and Services Committee. It is Wednesday, December 4th. We are being audio recorded, video recorded. Everything you say can and will be used against you, probably, especially given our new prosecutorial powers. Start of the meeting, I am joined by, from Ward 6, Councillor Alan Lobovitz, from Ward 8, Councillor Stephen Farrell, from Ward 1, Councillor John Oliver, from Ward 3, Councillor Julian Malachy. I am Josh Brinsman, Chair of the Committee from Ward 4. Vice Chair of the Committee, Bill Humphrey from Ward 5 is here, and David Mickley on the Committee from Ward 2 is here as well. In the room, Jonathan Yo, Chief Operating Officer, Mignon Murray, Head Executive Director of the Department of Older Adult Services. Director of Older Adult Services. Sorry. Okay. First item is item 461-24. Authorization to appropriate and expend $2 million to the Newton Public Schools. Mr. Hurley, if I'm not mistaken, excuse me, Assistant Superintendent Liam Hurley. Welcome, and I believe you are going to tell us about this item.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. Liam Hurley, Assistant Superintendent, CFO. Thanks so much. So this is something that Dr. Nolan and our new Assistant Superintendent, Gina Flanagan of Curriculum Instruction, have really brought and surfaced to the forefront. And just want to thank the Executive Office and the Mayor's team for identifying this potential funding for us. So as Dr. Nolan has kind of made her entry plan, I think you folks have been following her pretty closely. She's really looked at particularly the curriculum piece. We made an investment in our literacy and reading programs in the last year. And this is now kind of the second piece and phase of that. This is for our math curriculum, which from kind of their work, they believe has really not been updated or any significant investments in 20 years. So we need to go out and do a procurement for this. We need to make sure we get the right math curriculum. So we do not have yet one identified. This is going to take, it's going to be a process for us to pick the best curriculum for Newton. This is going to take several years for us to implement. I've laid out, and I apologize, I think I was late in getting some materials to you. So we've got some estimates for, I think we'd kind of roll this out for our elementary schools, our middle, and then high schools. There's certainly going to be training and then some consumable and supplies and workbooks that are required. So I've kind of broken out an estimate of just about $2 million for this. And so really, really grateful potentially for the support. And Anna, Dr. Nolan couldn't be here tonight, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer the specific curriculum questions. I can do my best, but I know this is badly needed, and I know that we're looking forward to it. So open it back up to you folks.
All right, thank you, Liam. I did not get a chance to see the materials. Well, I saw that the materials came through. I didn't get a chance to review them. If you want to go through what you sent to us, you can, but we would have to take a vote as a committee to accept those because they came to us within 48 hours of the meeting. Do you need to go through those?
But
let me ask this for the committee. Did folks review those?
I looked at it.
Okay.
I looked at it.
Okay. Or looked at it. I didn't. I'm the jackass. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
No.
No. That's fair. That's fair. Let me also acknowledge that we've been joined by Councillor Lyle Baker, our final member of the committee. Good to see you, Councillor Baker. I know you'll be sort of on and off all night. Totally understandable, but thank you for joining us.
Can I
Councillor Farrell.
general question? Is the VoIP part of the 2 million?
sorry, no, that's actually a separate item. That's a $300,000 additional item, and that is really replacing phone systems at North and South. So that's a separate docket item. I apologize.
That's the next item. We'll be
Next
doing
item.
that.
On this, if I may continue.
Please.
It looks like the consumable math books and a lot of training, as I look at this, is $285,000. What is the K-5 through 12 money? Is that for training? Is it for classrooms? Is it for?
Yeah, thank you. It's really for a lot of instructional materials that we're going to be getting. We'll be receiving incredible amounts of instructional materials, both both hard copies, books, and as well as I'm going to be assuming software and online materials as well. In addition to that, there is typically ongoing workbook materials where students will be taking these items in addition to this. The way these contracts are typically quite complicated, and they've got lots of add-ons. So these are workbooks that we would be passing out, particularly at the schools, for students to take home the work, and this is work that they'll be taking with them. So it's slightly different than a lot of the classroom materials.
So am I understanding that essentially $1.7 million of this is for materials? Is any of that for teacher training? A professional, let me say? Or
Yeah.
that's just books?
Yeah, a lot of it is really going to be basically the curriculum materials themselves, and again, it's going to be a combination, I think, of the software and materials. Embedded in that will be training, and we typically do a kind of a train the trainer model, and so this is going to be rolled out in each of our grades or our levels, our elementary and our middle and high school will have different levels, basically how we implement and roll this out. So training will be included in that, and then over and above that, we think that there's going to be additional training required just throughout the entire district to make sure we're fully, implementing this.
For me, and the questions I've received about why we're giving another $2 million to the schools, and believe me, I am in favor of doing this. I have a lot of faith in the superintendent and the staff she has put together, and school committee. But a lot of questions are saying, what is this in addition to what we've just negotiated? Is it all books? Or I would love to be able to say to people that a lot of this is for training people on the new materials. If that's a fair statement to make.
So I feel like if I had looked at the materials that you sent, I probably would have seen that $150,000 is earmarked towards development and training.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And $1.7 million towards books.
Materials, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 3-year estimate, right? This covers 3 years.
It's a 3-year estimate, so we would not be implementing all of this. You could not implement this all at one time.
I understand that too. Okay.
All right, let me just,
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank
no
you.
problem. Thank you. You're all set. It sounds like we are at least considering what you sent us today. So I'm just going to quickly make a motion that we allow the materials that were sent and emailed to the committee today to be considered as part of this discussion. Any discussion on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so I mean, that's sort of a suspension of our own rule that all materials have to be submitted 48 hours in advance. Folks understand that. Okay. I'm going to go to Councilor Oliver, then Malachi. Councilor Oliver?
Thank you, Chair. So understanding that Dr. Nolan isn't with us, and I'll try and keep my questions, I don't know how I could possibly, but anyway, ask difficult questions. It says that it's an estimated 3-year implementation cost. Does that mean it's going to take 3 years to implement and these are the costs, and then perhaps after the 3 years, this curriculum might remain in place for some other cost?
Thank you for that. Yeah, and again, my apologies for the late delivery in this. So this is the 3-year implementation cost we're expecting. I do expect after that there will be some ongoing costs related to the upkeep of this type. There's not an expectation if we make a change to a new math curriculum that we would be changing. I'm not sure if that was your question. Changing after 3 years. We would have ongoing costs after that, and my assumption would be that our budget, the NPS budget, would be absorbing and paying for those costs. So this is really a kickstart for us after many, many years of not having a new math curriculum in our system to get going. And this obviously it's a big number. I don't want to minimize that, but this is a big investment for us and for our students to get going with kind of the latest. We've got a combination, again, I'm not the best one to speak to it, but a combination of things that the schools and teachers have been doing, homegrown versus as well as other products they've done. Again, still delivering great results, but this is really a unified approach, which really Dr. Nolan has said this is really what we need to do and what DESE expects us to do for our students.
Yeah, and yes, I've heard Dr. Nolan talk about the need for a new math curriculum more than once. And I'm going to be careful with my next question because I'm going to bring up a topic that I don't want us to talk about tonight, but I think it is related. This whole concept of, the multiple levels in the classrooms at the high school level, at least. Does this curriculum or whichever curriculum that NPS chooses are those two things interconnected, or would it just mean that curriculum goes to separate classrooms and taught at different times and so on and so forth?
That's a great question, and is certainly a topic I think that's being addressed in a lot of forums right now. We'd be implementing this curriculum, I think, looking at what's the plan for Newton Public Schools. I think this curriculum, in my mind, should be agnostic to what that leveling would be. This is for what our students are going to need. We've got students, I think, at different, I think, as you can imagine, different varying levels, varying needs in the district. This curriculum is going to serve students that may be struggling. It should be also serving students that are, at benchmark and exceeding benchmark. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question. I don't think I'm not going to be able to talk about multi-level classes, how that works. But this curriculum, my understanding is that this will service, and that's the goal of this, of any new curriculum, really service a wide variety of needs that we've got in our district.
Yeah, I think I heard the answer that I'm looking for in there. I'll play it back, see if I got it right. Whatever curriculum is chosen by NPS would be suitable for all levels, including those performing at expectation above and below expectations for all grades.
That's right. In my opinion, that would be a failure on our end if we did not implement a curriculum with that in mind.
Great, thanks. So,
Okay, and just as sort of a corollary, did I also hear that the decision of whether to level classrooms or continue with multi-level classrooms is separate from the discussion about which curriculum to select?
Yeah, I would, again, this isn't my area of expertise, but I would say that is a separate decision, particularly as it relates to this curriculum purchase. I think this is going to be the superintendent, the school committee, and our school leaders, really kind of deciding, what is the best approach.
Thank you. Councillor Malky, followed by Lovett.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So can you, my understanding is this is to get us in line with the state requirements for curriculum, is that correct?
We state that this is basically the DESE has got certain basically benchmarks for districts that it assesses, Newton and other communities on. And so it's not specifying that this particular curriculum is a requirement, but the belief is that this curriculum will basically bring us more in line with the framework, is my understanding of what DESE is looking schools to be teaching in their district. I may be having Dr. Nolan being able to log on. So I apologize. I'm not the educational expert, so she may be able to log on here. I'll check in with her if that was the committee's wish to see, because I think there's a lot more educational questions here than I might be prepared to answer for you folks.
I think that would be good if she's available. So you said bring us more in line. Don't we want to actually be in line?
We are in line. We are in line already with DESE guidelines in terms of performance and assessment. So I'm not aware of any letters or pieces from DESE saying that we're out of alignment.
Is performance and assessment the same as the curriculum and material code?
No, but DESE often does not, as far as I know, specify the actual curriculum. they do analyze certainly performance and look at the outcomes of students.
Outcomes being MCAS?
That's one of them. I think that they look at a number of different, I think they look at a lot of different metrics in terms of, and they give certain rankings to schools in terms of performance and where they're, how their standing is, what's their academic standing, what's their growth. I mean, I think in many cases, they're looking at potentially growth for students in a variety of areas as well. And
I see, yes.
Welcome, Superintendent Nolan. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. So it's a long time since I was in my high school companies and all that, and not having had kids, I haven't been through it vicariously, but can you kind of explain, especially with math, what's changed in math curriculum since we did this in 20 years, and how long would whatever we implement here be good for?
So, Dr. Nolan, if you're here, I see you. You're muted. Oh, great. Okay, so Dr. Nolan, I've given these guys a very broad overview of the plan. They've been asking a number of kind of curriculum type questions, so I said that I was reaching out to you, so they've got some questions. So appreciate you coming in. Said you're the expert.
I had my eyes dilated earlier, and I didn't think I would be at fighting shape for this, but let's go. So your question, counselor, is what has changed in mathematics instruction in the 20 years that was the last time we did a curriculum audit review?
Right, and I guess, I know there were periods when people didn't really like how math was being taught. Is this kind of like a course correction, kind of like getting back to science-based reading instruction?
I've been doing this for 30 years and no one's ever happy with math instruction. So that's been my experience. Back in 2017 was the last, or maybe 2015 was the last time that the Department of Education revamped the manner of mathematics education dictated at the state level. Remember, we've only had state standards since the 90s. So prior to that, districts did whatever they wanted in whatever order they wanted, and with little concern for hitting certain targets. Since the college scene has changed, and many districts go through accreditation processes through what's called the NEASC group, the New England Association for Schools and Colleges, that dictated an expectation that certain standards and certain courses were covered. Newton Public Schools has eschewed that process. Things like MCAS meant that we didn't really need to, because there was a test that said we're going to test certain things, and in order for us to do fairly well on those things, we had to cover a lot of those items. One of the challenges for us right now, we're just in the middle of a math curriculum review, is it's become clear to us that depending on the middle school you attend and the high school you attend, different standards, different instructional strategies, and different curriculum is actually taught at each of these places. So we have a very uneven base across our system. So that at the get-go is a very difficult situation, because when you then come to a situation like leveling and accelerating students, what is the floor that we are using? Is it the floor at Bigelow Middle School? Is the floor at Day? Which high school's floor are we using? So we do not have a Newton Public Schools system right now that is reliable no matter what teacher you have and no matter what building you're in. That's not to cast aspersions on teachers. Teachers have done a strong job building their own curriculum, but in many cases it could be different from, say, ninth grade teacher here and ninth grade teacher here in the same class. That has changed across the state in the last 20 years. The expectation is that school systems have specific expectations for the curriculum. They have pacing guides, scope and sequences, and common assessments to assess whether or not students have mastered certain content. That way, different districts know well in advance of a high stakes test like MCAS, whether or not students are hitting the marks that we expect them to hit. That is what we aspire to. And most districts have at least a base set of curriculum or text resources. And in the last 20 years, that's been added to by adaptive math resources that allow us to personalize and differentiate base math instruction. So there's a base, but then it'll say, and here are resources for learners who are already accelerated. Here are resources for English language learners, and here are resources for those who may have special learning needs. Also includes translation services. We don't have any of those materials right now, and we have very few textbook resources. So it's very difficult for me to say that I can provide an even system that every child will get what they need when we have such variance. Now, we have a lot of strong teachers, so that's really good. But let's say when we onboard a new teacher, it takes years for that teacher to really find their sea legs in mathematics or any subject because they don't have a starting point. It's like they have to go to meetings with older teachers who've been here longer to educate them on, here are the things we generally cover. So we're auditing that in depth now. We know that we are going to need to purchase more resources. This will also address some of the challenges that teachers have let us know about: lack of professional development and a lack of resources that they could use to adapt it to meet the needs of the kids in their classes.
And how did you, so I guess there's several companies that could provide this. What differentiates them, and how is the decision made which one to pick?
So there are hundreds of companies that could provide this. We took the largest publishers and put an average cost together to forecast this for you so that we wouldn't miss the opportunity to obtain this resource for the students. The process that we're undergoing right now is to identify what do we want our scope and sequence and our expected unit outcomes to be, which company can meet those standards, and a list of other criteria. So we would use a rubric, and the math curriculum development team, which is comprised of teachers and administrative leadership and curriculum developers, would say, this is the one that we want based on certain criteria that we have pre-established. We then go out to bid, and that, because it's such a large purchase, there is a system that has to go in place under 30B, which Liam can certainly regale you with, but it basically means that all of those publishers who are responsive to the request put in bids, and we are bound to take the lowest bidder.
I'm sorry,
That meet our criteria.
Meet the criteria. Is this one of the procedures where you look at all the proposals first, and then you open and rank them, and then open the prices?
Well, we designed the RFP. We designed the request for proposals based on the rubric that we determine we need. And then responsive proposals are looked at. Liam, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
If I'm not mistaken, that the term is that you need to select the lowest responsible bidder, right?
Yes.
Which
Correct.
built into that term is that you have to have faith that they're going to meet the criteria. They didn't just come in with the lowest number, but they're also able to meet the criteria as you've established them. And you have confidence that they will be able to perform as expected.
Well, they're disqualified if they don't meet the criteria.
And are you at the stage now where you're ready to put out the bid, or are you still gathering the information to determine what would be in the request for bids?
So we know that we will be in a place where we can design that process in May. So the idea is to be able to purchase the materials over the summer, design the professional development, and execute within the next 2 years thereafter.
Thank you.
Councilor Lebovitz.
So just to follow up on that last point, execute meaning for all three levels, the elementary, middle, and high school over the next 2 years?
So that may be the one place we do have a current mathematics curriculum is at the elementary level, but it is a curriculum that has not been looked at since 2017. It is a widely respected curriculum, but we are not using it with fidelity. It may be chosen again, but as someone who's trying to create a vertical alignment in the system, there are many new math curricula that have been developed since the adoption of Investigations. Investigations is a specific methodology that uses inductive reasoning and project-based learning to teach mathematics. One of the misunderstandings that many of our parents have is that they are expecting a Russian math type execution of standard algorithmic instruction versus inductive reasoning. So we have to have a community discussion around our expectations for the future of our students in the workforce. And that was part of the reason that we did the profile of a learner process, is that many of our employers and all of our community members have just told us that adaptability, a learner's mindset, the ability to persevere and be collaborative is important to them. That may be at odds with some of the curriculum that we currently have. It may affirm Investigations, but I can definitely tell you that middle school and high school will need a curriculum refresh.
And then, how long will it be before you feel that you can determine the success of the program, both for the students, for the faculty? How long will it take for you to assess that once it's implemented?
So curriculum research will tell you that in a first year of implementation, you will see a dip in progress for students because teachers are learning a new curricula. It depends how long, Counselor Lovovitz, it takes us to roll it out. If there's resistance to the rollout, or we have to negotiate some part of the rollout that I can't yet anticipate, that will delay implementation. It will take longer.
And then I have a financial question. The free cash, is that, I think the budget forecasted, is it 20 million, $18 million in free cash?
In total, it's like
total?
23 or so.
23,
Yeah.
okay, 23. So are we starting to be confident in steps of how much we'll have at the end of the year? In other words, we're requesting 2 million now. Is that,
Well,
we have confidence that we're going to reach a
Yeah,
certain
we've
level?
requested, I think, over 10 million so far, 10 or 12 million. And then we have the winter to go. So usually much of free cash is not spent until spring. Traditionally, this year, last couple of years, we've had this extra bump, but
Right.
normally free cash is distributed in the spring. That's what most communities do. Once you get through the winter season, and because oftentimes you need, there's emergencies that happen, plus snow and ice and everything. So
But there's a confidence at this point
Yes.
that at least 10 will be,
yes, that's why we
Okay,
released
that-
this much.
and this is part of that 10.
This is part of that. We allocated a big chunk for schools this year, as we did last year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Makeley, your hand was up briefly earlier. It's not down. I'm not going to call on you, but if you have a question, I'm happy to come to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First, Dr. Nolan, thanks for joining the conversation despite your dilated eyes. Hope you can see us enough, but definitely helpful to have your contributions. I think my broad question is just around the cost of investing in centralization efforts and the tensions around that. And it's something I brought up in a previous meeting on this topic. I'm sort of in a position where I trust your judgment, trust your leadership. You speaking to your approach really instills confidence in the plan you're taking. On the one hand, on the other hand, I have some sort of innate skepticism to investing too much in centralization, to doing too much in terms of control, both in terms of the cost that requires, the toll that might take on individual teachers, and while it might theoretically sound nice, how it actually is executed in classrooms can often be messy. So I just wanted to raise that sort of dual thinking that I have, both trusting your leadership on this, but also some amount of skepticism of how far we take centralization efforts on curriculum and other efforts.
Well, just to give you our collective philosophy, it's a lose tight scenario. Much has been done in the name of equity in the school system to address specific groups of students and their learning needs. Without a unified base curriculum, we will continue to perpetrate equity issues all the time. And that puts individual teachers on the front line of taking the brunt of that based on their individual classroom decisions. The more base materials we have and common assessments, the teachers will certainly individualize and use their secret talents and their secret sauce to personalize the instructional materials for the children in front of them. But without those materials, teachers they have to source those things themselves and spend time doing that. Then they have to design their own assessments. Then they have to personalize for the differentiated needs of the children in their classes. That is a recipe for burnout for teachers. And we are seeing that in the profession widely, and Newton teachers have labored without those resources for a very long time. They are an outlier in Metro West for the lack of resources that are put towards curriculum. It does not take away a teacher's individual capacity to shine and be creative. It says that at certain times we are going to be unified as a system so that we can follow through on the social compact that is public education for our families. You should be able to say, no matter what third grade class your child has, that there's a guaranteed set of materials that will be covered. How that happens and with what creative latitude is about the teachers. And so then we have to hire really awesome teachers and make sure that happens. We also do things called integrity walks, to your point about implementation, which is our administrators and our curriculum folks walking through to see, is that happening? Are we actually seeing the deployment of the curriculum we've invested in? I'll use our new literacy curriculum as an example. So as I go on integrity walks, I visited every second grade in 6 schools, let's say. And I'm seeing the unit plans unfolding. I'm seeing the same texts. I'm seeing very creative implementation by teachers as they work to learn the new systems and assessments. A first year of implementation means that they're trying to go through it with fidelity to try it all out. And then in subsequent years, we will create curated pacing and scope and sequence guides that says, you know, we as a teaching team in the 5th grade across the city, we say that we don't need this particular unit lesson, we'll do this lesson instead. And by the end of a 3 to 5 year period, we will have had a very strong curated curriculum with the commensurate resources. Teachers will know which things are mandatory and which things are choice. Right now, we do not have those items.
Thank you for that answer. And it's sort of that thoughtful approach that I think does balance multiple considerations that gives me confidence, and I definitely will be supporting this item. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Malky.
The other question I had was, once this is implemented, how long are we good for? How many years we anticipate it will kind of last or be good for?
So the industry standard for curriculum reviews is every 5 to 6 years. There should be a review of what you have been implementing. That doesn't mean there will necessarily be a new purchase every time. But as I've said, there just hasn't been a purchase of materials in a very long time.
And
this would be in the catch-up phase right now. So I did share at your most recent meeting where Liam and I last attended a chart of new deployments over time should we choose new materials, when those would occur, just for the first round of curriculum reviews for all areas. Now, not every area has a purchase. So for example, we're in our health and wellness phase right now for the PE and health classes. There's just not the same kind of curriculum purchase for that as there is, say, for a mathematics curriculum.
Yeah, and I recall the sort of the timeline, the bar chart, where you're doing
Yes.
different subject matter in a staggered basis. When the big bids come in and you pick one, if you're under the $2 million, what happens to any savings? Is that retained by NPS, or does it return to free cash, or this doesn't get spent?
Liam, you want to explain how that's been handled in the past?
Yeah, in the past, we've typically have used all that money. I think we returned a few on the literacy. We may have returned a little bit of money. So if we're done with the project and there is money remaining, that would go back to the city. But I can tell you that, you know, we're I think that we'll be looking at that entire amount, and I think needing that, you know, probably close to all that amount that we have there. But if we don't need that, then that would be a return back.
I mean, I will say that the materials you shared have a fairly specific breakdown, and if our math is off, that will be humorous. Go ahead, Councilor Malachy.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Okay. I think we're ready. Thank you for joining us, Superintendent Dr. Nolan. I will just add that I'm going to be supporting this. I think it's interesting that you said that no one's ever happy with the math curriculum. That's certainly something I've found to be true. There are always, you know, students who have trouble with it, students who excel at it. But after implementing a new math curriculum, I'm certainly looking forward, you know, 3 years from now to being unhappy with this one. So I'm happy to move approval. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, approved unanimously. Thank you, Dr. Nolan. I don't know if you're sticking around for the next one as well, which is 462-24. This is authorization to appropriate and expend $300,000 to Newton Public Schools. This is the voice over internet protocol item that Councilor Farrell alluded to earlier. Mr. Hurley, are you going to tell us quickly about this one as well?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. So we have been slowly replacing our older and outdated schools that have kind of the analog phone system with VoIP, voice over internet protocol systems. And north and south, we have not been able to get to. And so they have really outdated phone systems, and it's in some ways becoming a security issue for us. So this is something I know the city Chief Information Technology Officer, Joe Mulvey, has been worried about. Our Director of Technology, Steve Rattendi, has been on me for years, and we've been trying to within our budget be able to do this, but these are large enough that we've been not been able to do this within our budget. So this is going to basically bring those schools up to a much newer technology, and basically the phones we've got, and we've got some kind of quotes from Partners Technologies, which is our major vendor, basically saying they're not going to have the phones are not going to be supported that we've got anymore. So I think this is a critical need for us. In some ways, a safety need for us. It is really going to help these schools. We've got challenges, you may know, in these schools with some cellular coverage already. So having these phones, working well is critical for us.
Thank you. And we do have some of the materials. We have materials in the packet and the supplementary material. So any questions from committee members or anyone? Councilor Malachy.
So do I understand correctly that all the other schools have been done and it's just the high schools left?
There are still a few. I think we've got, so certainly the new elementary schools that we've been adding. So for example, something like Franklin and Countryside, because we're doing new buildings, they still have older phone systems. I could get a list. I still think we've got a couple of more schools remaining. I think we've got maybe Bigelow is potentially on our list, and one or two more elementary schools I think that are on the list. We've been trying to get to a couple of these. Certainly they're smaller. These are in the $150,000 range. Our elementary schools are more like $20,000 or $30,000. So we've been trying to get to a couple of those per year. But we thought that this was a big enough project, and those schools with the size of those, our student and staff population, this rose to a critical need. But if you'd like, I could get and send around maybe tomorrow a list of remaining schools that are still without VoIP.
Okay, thanks. And is it the case that cell phones generally work in the elementary schools and not in the high schools? And is that because of sort of building solidity or something like that?
Yeah, it's again, I think it's a little bit of a tricky answer, but both the schools and just the way they may be made and configured. I just know that if you're in the middle of those schools, particularly the high schools, you run into reception issues cellular wise. We do have Wi-Fi in the building, and there's something called Wi-Fi calling, but particularly Newton South has got very challenging cellular coverage if you get within that building. So I don't know if it's the construction, the steel. I can't give you a great answer on why that is. If it's just but certainly having these VoIP are going to help with having lines that are accessible outside the building.
And is the standard to have like a hardwired line in every classroom, or is it not hardwired?
Yes, yeah. So typically, all these classrooms would have a phone. They certainly can ring to the central office and then dial outside if needed. Yes.
And that's not working now.
No, many still do work, but there are a number of issues with the current system and the current phones. So many are working. So I don't want to tell you that they're not working, but they're struggling and not staying up. And there are times when they are down as well.
And is it because phones are now somehow dependent on software?
That is my understanding. Yeah, I mean, these are being run still. Some of our system are still being run on copper lines, and I think when you configure that into the system that they've got, I think that it's just not keeping up basically pace with what we've got. So these were the original phone lines. We did not do the VoIP when we built Newton North and Newton South. It's been there for quite some time as well.
Okay, and this is not an area I understand well, but I kind of feel bad that Verizon got rid of copper lines, and copper seemed to have many advantages, and now we're stuck with what they want to give us.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Council Farrell.
Not necessarily apropos to anything, but about 15 years ago, when there were more than 2 cell phone companies, they did a study in Newton about who got the best service, and the worst was in Ward 8, particularly at Newton South High School. And the very excited.
Yeah.
The students' cell phones worked in the school. But more importantly, if Mr. Baldy thinks this is an issue of concern and supportive of it, I'm in favor of doing it.
What I'm hearing is a motion to approve.
Yes.
Council Farrell has moved
Much better
approval.
request.
Council Lovett, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, we don't need a second. I don't think it's ready. Appreciate it though. I thought you had a question. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 8-0. Thank you. I believe that concludes the school portion of the festivities. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome to stick around. We have some fascinating presentations yet to come, but if you want to go tend to your pupils. I didn't plan that.
Oh my God. Take it and run. That was well done.
Next item is item 451-24. This is requesting discussion of aging in Newton, a community needs assessment. Ms. Murray, I don't know if you want to come join us to talk about this, but I think folks recall that I think during the budget discussions, we talked about the community needs assessment that the Department of Older Adult Services was going to conduct. I think we're all very excited about it, and now it's time to hear about how it went and what we found.
Yes, so the results are in, and we'll move from the kids to the other spectrum of residents of Newton. There's 22,000 residents who are age 60 and older in the city. So we engaged about a year ago, you're right, UMass Boston to do a needs assessment for us. Our last needs assessment for older adult services was about 10 years ago. We're less than a year away from the opening of the Cooper Center, so we're excited to get this data and the results and all the resident feedback. And I have hard copies of the presentation and of the study if anyone wants them in front of you. I will give them to you, and I will pass it off to Dr. Caitlin Coyle from UMass Boston to give the presentation and introduce her team.
Great, thank you, Mignon. Can everyone hear me okay in the room?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm glad to be here this evening to share the results. I was just reflecting, I believe it was a year ago in January that we did our survey, so it's about time that we're back here to share the results. I'm here tonight with two colleagues from UMass who were really instrumental in this project. Kathy Burns is here, as well as Claire Wickersham. And so Kathy's actually going to help present some of the recommendations. I'm going to share my screen. My plan is to sort of walk lightly through. It's a lot of information, and I encourage you all to, reflect on it as you will. And so I won't hopefully bore you too much. And then we'll talk about some recommendations and how it's going to inform the work moving forward in Newton. So.
Yes, we are seeing it.
Great, thanks. All right, so here this evening to share the results, I want to thank the mayor for their support of this project, and really the leadership of Mignon and her chair of the Council on Aging, Joan Belle-Isle, who were really with us the entire way in terms of guiding this work to make sure that we were asking the right questions and then making sure that it's going to really be useful to them as they move forward. As well, we heard from a lot of residents you'll hear about and from stakeholders, and we want to thank them for their participation. As you know, the quality of the data is only as good as the quality of the input, and we got really great response in Newton. So we thank everyone for taking the time to do a survey or participate in a focus group. As Mignon mentioned, you are approaching a new building with the Cooper Center, and as well, there's some other factors related to why it's important to kind of stop and think and ask older adults what they want and need as they think about aging in Newton. Those are things like people we know tend to desire to live and age in their communities. That's true in Newton as well. There is a large population of older adults, and that there is some slight growth in that population in Newton. And we also just know that when we think about older adults in the US, we really think oftentimes of people 16 over. I always think it's really important to reflect on the fact that there's at least 5 generations of people in that age group, and they all have varying life experiences, preferences, and needs. And we know that those things change over time. So it's important to recognize that. And this needs assessment is meant to inform the planning of the Newton Council on Aging as they think as the new Cooper Center opens, but also other things like the potential of pursuing an age and dementia friendly designation or continuing that work, as well as I think it's really important, when we think about aging in the community, we often think about the senior center or the centers the physical spaces where people go, but we know that aging impacts life outside of those 4 walls in lots of different ways. And so our project really took that holistic approach in terms of asking about things about housing and transportation and respect and walkability and the things that we know will also facilitate aging well in Newton. So these are just the components of what we did. It included a demographic profile using data from the American Community Survey. We did 7 key informant interviews. We conducted 5 focus groups, including residents of various backgrounds, and the community survey, in which we heard from 2,869 residents, age 60 and older, for a 57% response. And I believe this is about 10% of the overall population of residents 60 plus in Newton. And so the data that we're showing you this evening is about 10% of, representative of about 10% of the older adult population. And so this is just a comparison of who we heard from with respect to age and gender. And we also compared the age distribution to the city age distribution of residents 60 plus overall. So just for example, you can see that we have a slight underrepresentation of people age 60 to 69. So we had 34% of our sample identified in this age bracket compared to 47% of the 60 plus population citywide. So slight underrepresentation there. Very slight overrepresentation of people in their 70s. We managed to hit it right on the mark with the folks in their 80s. And we did have 260 people who preferred not to tell us how old they were. So 9% of our sample, we included their data, but we don't know how old they were. We do have more females than males, which is both comparable to the distribution of 60 plus in Newton, but also just really common with survey response in terms of females being more likely to respond to surveys. We asked about how long, just in terms of getting to know who are the 2,800 people who responded. We asked about how long they've been in Newton. You can see that over half of them have been in Newton for 35 years or longer. So we got a lot of lifelong residents. But we also have 34% who've been in Newton between 15 and 34 years, and 12% of the sample have been in Newton for less than 14 years. And so these are people who are 60 and older. And so potentially came to Newton in midlife and are still living in the city. We asked about how important it is for them to stay in Newton as they get older, and this is shown by age. And what you see is that as people get older, they are more likely to want to stay. They are, prioritizing. It's more important for them to stay in Newton. So under half of people in their 60s said that it was very important for them to stay in Newton, compared to 64% and 71% of people over age 70. In terms of the demographic profile, this is the distribution of age it's the decennial census 2000, 2010 to 2020, and then it includes projections to 2025 and 2035 that are made possible. They are produced by the UMass Donahue Institute. And I think what's relevant here is that, and it's true, that overall the population size of Newton isn't changing drastically, but we do see a slight decline in the under age 60 population. So looking at 2020, for example, 74% were under age 60, and that's going to projected to go towards just 70%. And that you see a slight increase in the populations age 60 to 79 and 80 plus. And the other thing that's interesting is that compared to the 2010 decennial census, for example, there were 5% residents age 80 and older, and that is expected to increase to 9%. So not quite doubling in size. And so it is a small share of the population. But when we think about the need for older adult services, oftentimes we think about the older end of the older adult age bracket. And so by 2035, it's expected that that 30% of the population of Newton will be age 60 or older. So this is a synthesis of the qualitative information that we collected from the project, including quotes from residents. We asked them about what they value about living in Newton, and these are the top three. So we reviewed everything, we themed it out, and we actually ended up counting the themes. And so this is the top three themes that emerged from those pieces of information. Number one is people value the location of Newton, including outdoors and access to amenities. So they like being physically in Newton in terms of its proximity to Boston, having some green space, being able to get what you need, sort of that location aspect. Coming in second were the people, the friends and family, the sort of friendliness of the community, knowing people. And then in third was the safety of Newton and the perception of city infrastructure and sort of feeling like the city is well taken care of. So that's what people said that they value about living in Newton. We asked similarly about, or I guess, we asked about people's concerns about being able to stay in Newton as they age. And again, the same process was taken. The top three concerns, number one, not surprising probably, is cost of living. And this was sort of broken down into two subcategories related to just affordability of life, cost of living, and affordability of all kinds of things. But then specifically, we heard a lot about property taxes in particular in terms of the cost. But that was sort of the number one thing, is people feeling like they won't be able to stay in Newton because of the rising costs. And you see some quotes that illustrate that around this slide. Number two was the lack of downsizing options and need for home maintenance. So people recognizing that they are in a home that maybe they would like to either be something smaller, something, one level, or the home that they're in will need some kind of altercation or maintenance in order for it to be a place that they want to age and that they can age well. So that sort of housing piece came in second, but specifically this idea of age-friendly housing that's appropriate for people as they age. And then coming in third was people's concern about access to the community more broadly. So that was sort of twofold. One, it's about maintaining mobility, people being concerned about being able to stay physically mobile, but also with terms of access to transportation and kind of the intersection of those two things. So recognizing that there are transportation options around, but being able to physically access those transportation options and what would be done once they aren't driving anymore. And so that sort of intersection of mobility and transportation came in third. Also from the demographic profile, but a little bit from the survey as well, as this is the median household income distribution of residents of Newton. It compares people 65 and older to people 45 to 64. And what I think is interesting about this is just the greater socioeconomic diversity of the older adults in Newton, in terms of you just got more people in all income categories. But you also have about 24% who report living on under $50,000 a year. This is based on 2022 estimates. And so that is, one in four older adults is living under 50,000. Of course, this is income, not wealth. But I think it's important when we think about what people are living on, that it's much more of a fixed situation, and certainly different than the broader population of Newton. Of our survey respondents, we asked them, how do you feel like you have the resources to meet your basic financial needs? And 10% of the sample, 177 people, said that they do not believe that they have the adequate resources to meet their basic needs at this time. So that include things like food, home maintenance, healthcare, and other expenses. So again, a subset of the older adult community who is facing sort of a more dire financial insecurity situation. Relatedly, housing costs, we know, are often the main driver of cost of living, and this is about the proportion of older adults who spend more than 30% of their monthly income on rent or mortgage. And you see that 30% of homeowners spend at least 30% of their monthly income on housing, compared to about over half of renters age 65 and over spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And so just again, thinking about the financial insecurity to start with, and then thinking about the existing costs that people have in terms of basically being able to house themselves, et cetera, and then thinking about, what's left over for the rest of livelihood sort of thing. We did ask a question about food security, and when we look at the broad sample of survey respondents, we had low sort of prevalence of at least self-identified food insecurity. And this was a question that asked about, in the last year, were you worried about running out of food before you had money to buy more? But when we looked at those 177 people who said that they had some financial insecurity, that rose to 27% of people who said that in the last year they've been worried about having enough food. And so again, just thinking about the sort of urgency around that, and the sort of vulnerability of that population in particular. In terms of housing, these are survey results, and we asked about home modification and home repair, recognizing that Newton has a relatively old housing stock, and just sort of the top concern of housing that we have here in the Commonwealth and frankly the rest of the country. But what you see here is that in terms of home modification, so these are things like handrails in showers or ramps, things that are more sort of proactive in terms of making a home more age-friendly. We see that 48% say that no, their current residence does not need those modifications, and about half also is true for home repair. And we see, I think my things are mixed up here, but in terms of repairs, we see that 30% of respondents said that yes, they need a home repair and they can afford it. So that's the orange section. And about 9% of people say, yes, I need a home repair, but I cannot afford to make it. And a similar pattern with the modifications is that 31% say, yes, I need a modification and I can afford it. And about 5% say, yes, I need a modification, but I cannot afford it. And so for me, the takeaway here is always interesting to me to think about, okay, so a little less than a third of people say, like, yes, I need these things and I have the money to do it. And so the question I ask is sort of like, okay, well then what's, maybe what's keeping them from doing it, or what else would be, what else is at play there? And we know that sort of access to contractors and sort of trustworthy resources for making those repairs, and just the management of those projects can be overwhelming, and sort of where to start and all of that. So just thinking about this idea of how do we modify the existing housing stock to be appropriate for older adults is one thing to think about. We asked about what kind of housing people would prefer if they needed to move out of their current home, and this is by age. What you see is that for folks who are 80 and over, their top preference is for an assisted living community. And for people in their 60s and 70s, that their top preference is for a condo or townhome. In terms of transportation, we see this is driving status by age. So we asked about do you currently drive? And the options were no, I do not currently drive. I drive with some limitations, meaning I avoid driving at night. I avoid driving out of town, out of the city, etc. And what you see is that with time, the proportion of people who are non-drivers increases pretty dramatically. And as well, people who limit their driving in some way increases, such that people in their 70s, 22% of people in their 70s are modifying their driving in some way, compared to the 29% of people in their 80s. And so you see that taking those things together in terms of non-drivers and people who are modifying their driving in some way, more than 40, almost half of people are in that situation. And so when we think about transportation options and transportation alternatives, those are the groups of people that we often would think about, benefiting from transportation options, people who are scaling back. And so that is a significant share of people, but it also is the older people, 70 plus older. So going back to that original concern about the intersection of mobility and transportation, I think is something else to consider here. We did ask about whether in the last month last 12 months, they've had to miss or reschedule a medical appointment because of a lack of transportation. And what you see is that is 30% of people who do not drive say, yes, that has happened to me, compared to 9% of people who've limited their driving in some way, and just 3% of people who have no limitations to their driving. So it is an issue that disproportionately affects people with driving limits. In terms of outdoor spaces, we asked about people's satisfaction with a number of features of the community. And what you're seeing here is the proportion of dissatisfaction with those things. So we just sort of identified the top 3 things that people were most dissatisfied with. And that included conveniently located public restrooms, lighting along sidewalks, and the availability of benches or shaded seating. In terms of community supports and health services, we did ask about caregiving. Asked in the last few years, have you provided care to someone who's disabled or frail? 37% of the whole sample said yes, but that was highest in that 60 to 69-year-old age category. So 45% of people in that age group are saying, yes, I have provided or recently provided care to someone who's disabled or frail. We asked them why, what was the condition requiring care, and number 1 was mobility impairment, which was reported by 35% of caregivers. Interestingly to me, the number 2 condition for needing care was a psychological condition. So 21% of caregivers said that they were providing care to someone who had a psychological condition, and that's what required the need for care. And then 17% of people were caring for someone with a chronic disease like diabetes or arthritis, or Alzheimer's or dementia, another kind of dementia. So this has implications, A, for what people in their 60s are doing with their time in terms of caring for families and friends, but also in terms of the types of conditions that they're trying to manage and help with. I think that's important as we think about the possibility of supports and services that could be helpful. We did also ask caregivers about the impact of caregiving on them. And so this is for caregivers. We asked about various parts of their life and whether they've noticed or they've experienced deterioration in those aspects of life. You see that 16 and 17% of people said that their physical or mental health has deteriorated because of during the caregiving experience, and 21% say my social life has deteriorated. So really that sort of the isolating impact of caregiving is prevalent here. And then 9% say that their financial circumstances have deteriorated because of caregiving. In terms of social participation, we asked a few questions about that. What I'm showing here is the various types of ways that people can socially connect in the current time and how frequently people do that. And so in terms of talking on the phone or sending email or social media, you see that more than half do that on a daily basis. So people are talking on the phone or video calling, or they're texting or sending email, social media, at least daily with other people. And the thing that I think is of interest is that when we look at getting together in person on the daily, compared daily, only 18% are getting together with someone daily. And actually about 10% of people are getting together in person with someone yearly or never. And so when we think about the risk of social isolation, not necessarily saying these people are isolated, but that certainly says that 10% of at least the 2,800 older adults who participated in the survey are at risk for isolation in terms of their frequency of in-person contact. Maybe some good news to you guys. People they do feel included and supported in the community. We asked about a number of different questions related to that. We do see that 90% of respondents say that they do know someone living within 30 minutes on whom they could rely for help if they needed it. And that 58% strongly agree that local policymakers consider the interests of older residents. And that there's actually, 16% say they don't know, and 26% disagree or strongly disagree with that statement that local policymakers consider the interests and concerns of older adults. So we asked a number of questions about this Cooper Center for Active Living. I will make a huge caveat here that this survey was done about a year ago, and the language that we were using to refer to the Senior Center and the Cooper Center was different then, and also was in the midst of, as you currently are in terms of the physical move of the Senior Center services. And so you'll see that we refer to participation in the Newton Senior Center, and that was, at the time of the survey, which was about a year ago. And so this is utilization of the Senior Center. We see that there's an increase with age, which is something we commonly see. So 20% of the residents in their 60s had participated at all, had ever been. So this is like I've ever done anything at the Senior Center, compared to 42% and 45% of people in their 70s and 80s. But of people who said that they've ever been to the Senior Center, 70% have only been there a few times a year for special events or, certain things. And so you've got 18% that go on a weekly basis, and then, about 12% that go on a monthly basis. But there's a large portion of people who just come, once in a while. And again, this is at the time of the survey. We asked about what limits people from going, and we looked at this by people who said, I've ever been to the Senior Center versus I've not ever been to the Senior Center. And so the light blue is non-attendees, people who've never been. We asked, what limits you from going? Number one is that they don't need they say they don't need the services offered, and that they're still working. And that is also, they're not interested in the programs that are being offered. For people who have participated at the Senior Center before, you see that they also don't need the service. The factor that limits them from participating more is that they don't need the services offered, that they participate elsewhere. And there was a number of people who wrote in other, and that included a lot of people talking about how they don't use it now, but they look forward to using it in the future when they feel like they have a need for it, or when the time, whenever this magical time is that people decide that they have officially aged. And so I think the thing I take away from this, both in terms of people still working, but also this perception of having to have a need to participate at the center, and not just being able to participate because there's something you enjoy doing there, or, you want to be with others, that kind of thing is certainly there. And I know all of that is being addressed in the new building plan. We asked about what kind of services people would like to see more of, again, looking at users and non-users, or attendees and non-attendees. In fact, the top sort of 3 to 5 of these are actually very similar across the two groups. The sort of top 3 are transportation to medical appointments, in-home programs, and information and referral for social services. We also see some interest, particularly from attendees, for support groups and transportation for errands around Newton. So people are wanting transportation, they're wanting in-home things and information and referral, and also support groups. Again, this was just asking about services. We did ask a similar question about programs, where people really identified things like indoor fitness, performances and presentations, educational lectures, outdoor exercise, as sort of the top 4 things that they would like to see more of with respect to programs. So people want to be active, both physically, but also intellectually. They want to be, the arts was up there, and arts and wellness programs were also up there in sort of the top half of the preferences. And so people, the performances, the arts, the wellness, the physical activity, and the volunteer opportunities are all things that people are interested in and having more of in Newton. We also asked about how people get information. And actually, before I do that, there's one thing that's not in here that I wanted to just make sure that I commented on, which is we did have a question about how likely is it that you or someone in your household will use the new Cooper Center. At the time, it wasn't called the Cooper Center. And among people who'd never been to the Newton Senior Center before, 43% of them said that they would be very likely to participate in the new space. And so that's just another, as we think about that new space and who's going to come and what are the things that they're going to want to do, I think it's exciting to think about sort of the non-attendees or the people who haven't yet interacted with the Newton older adult services. In terms of information about activities, we asked, this is by age. I think for people in their 80s, they are getting they prefer to get their information from the newsletter that the Newton Older Adult Services puts out. So that was number 1 for them. For people in their 60s and 70s, they are really big on the emails from the city, including the mayor's update and other newsletters, as well as the City of Newton's website as being another sort of big places for information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, who's going to just kind of briefly describe some of the recommendations that we make moving forward, and then we look forward to your thoughts. Kathy, I'm happy to advance slides for you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I just want to say that it was very exciting to work in Newton because, number one, you see we got an incredible response on the survey. That 57% is extraordinarily high. And I had the privilege of facilitating the focus groups and meeting with what we call key informants, municipal folks and organizational leaders. And so there was a really high level of interest and involvement that I know all of us were very appreciative of. And so I just wanted to say that at the outset. So we have the report that you have in hand, which summarizes the recommendations. I'm going to summarize some of those recommendations for you, but please take a look at that closely because there are more details there that I think are useful. And I should say also that some of the things that were identified as issues are things that may be important in other cities and towns across the Commonwealth. And so we don't aim to address some of the more knotty issues in any kind of way, other than trying to think about some of the more low-hanging fruit recommendations that we think have strong possibilities for being implemented or already being implemented or planned for the new Cooper Center. So I'll just say that. So the first thing I want to say also is that considering the size of the new Cooper Center and comparing that to the size and diversity of the older population in Newton, there's a big challenge there because you have the challenge of multiple generations, as Caitlin said, and you also have a lot of possibilities. So we felt like we wanted to focus first on the Cooper Center and definitely expanding the program offerings and hours of operation are going to help encourage new participation. I think there's already plans for evening and weekend activities, so that goes without saying. We also, as Caitlin pointed out, saw that indoor fitness and performance and presentations, educational programming were priorities for all age groups for expanding programming at the Cooper Center. So we also believe that obviously with the size of the Cooper Center, the need for additional staffing, particularly around perhaps volunteer coordination to improve the human capital at the center is going to be really important. And also the service part of the center is going to be really, really important. So people with social service backgrounds, I think, are going to be important additions for staffing. And then also just programming that allows residents to get involved in deciding what programs to keep, which programs to get rid of, and perhaps training to help people become facilitators will help in staffing and operations. The next slide, increased awareness of programs and services available is needed. We think that a lot of people we heard from, we realize that you're never too old to be shy and feel uncomfortable in new situations. And we heard from people who said that sometimes they don't come into places like this because they just don't know where to start. They don't know somebody. So it's going to be really important to be welcoming at the new center and to create opportunities for people to learn about what's there. Particularly since there's so many different age breakdowns within the older population, it'll be a great opportunity to help target for people some of the services like Medicare. Counseling and implementation is big for people who are turning 65, pre-retirement counseling, retirement counseling, things that might not ordinarily be found at a senior center, I think, or will be important at the Cooper Center. And something like sending people who are 60 years old a copy of the newsletter, just like AARP does when you're 50. It might be a way to attract people to the resources of the center. Caitlin already mentioned that caregiving is that would be the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, caregiving is an incredibly common phenomenon, and people are going to need continued support around that. I think over a third, 37% of respondents were caregivers. And interestingly, for some people, maybe for you, that the highest group was that people who were in their 60 to 69 age group. And those are people who we might be calling the sandwich generation. They might have kids at home as well as aging parents. And so really reaching out to those folks is going to be incredibly important. So the other thing that you saw, and even though there were multiple issues that people were dealing with as caregivers, dementia is one of them. And so we encourage, many more pockets within Newton to get involved in something called Dementia Friends, which is an international program. And we have a program within Massachusetts. It's a great 1-hour program that does a whole lot to give people insights into what it's like to be living with dementia and to be supportive. Boot camp, caregiver boot camps, a caregiver night out. So there are lots of really not high capacity ways to really support people who are dealing with caregiving, and also collaborating with other organizations. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health, Illness and Mental Illness is a wonderful organization. There's stuff going on at Newton Wellesley Hospital. These are ways to really help support people who are dealing with family members with mental illness. Transportation, always a big issue. And we noted that, maintaining independence is a major concern for older adults. transportation is a key facilitator of that. So many are car dependent and they're worried about getting around if they can't drive. Interestingly to me, about a third of those who responded said that they get around by walking and biking as a primary mode of transportation, and 24% rely on the MBTA and buses. So almost a fifth of those who are 80 and aren't driving, and 29% are driving, but with limitations. So it's the whole issue of transportation. People were saying things like, we have access to highways, we have access to transportation, but always not within Newton. So there was a lot of interesting commentary, particularly in the focus groups, about transportation. So let's keep educating, enrolling folks in the new Go Newton, and look at evaluating how it's going so that we can facilitate improvements around education and usage, and continue providing programs that help people understand what alternatives there are to driving. So kind of like the retire from driving educational programs are going to be really important. Financial security, we said, is a top concern, the number one concern, and it's one of those things that is ubiquitous across the Commonwealth. So we were thinking about some of the things that are practical that can be done, and that is promoting awareness of various housing options, across the lifespan, and continue to contribute to local conversations about housing options for older adults who wish to find supportive housing. Aging in place workshops. I know that in my experience, I've done things around Envision Your Future, which allows people to come together and think about a whole range of options for aging where they live, where people live. And also involving the business community. Let's ask them for an older adult discount. The Charles River Regional Chamber, I know, has employers who are looking for new employees, so maybe age-friendly, helping them to support age-friendly employment opportunities through their members. Yes, Caitlin talked about housing maintenance, repair. That's a big issue for folks. They want access to information and resources when they can't afford to make repairs. So engage with fraternal organizations, develop a local fund to help offset needs of home repairs, and consider ways of connecting residents with local resources for home repair and modification. There's lots of websites that are really wonderful. I mean, just providing lists and resources for people to find contractors and other kinds of home repair folks and modification folks. Let's see. The last, explore opportunities to create more age-friendly environments townwide. So one of the things that we spoke about was this issue of social isolation, people wanting benches, people talking about bathrooms. I think that the most interesting thing for me in the process of doing this assessment was Mignon asked, could we look at what we call solo agers and people who are semi and newly retired. These are people who, this is a growing population within the older population. And you probably have heard about the term solo ager, and it is almost like, I think it was 22% of people who responded on the survey said they were 65 and living alone. And the 2023 current population survey puts the number nationally at 28%. So it's a lot of people that are living out there living alone. And as we continue to explore the issues of social isolation and loneliness in our community, it's important to consider the ways in which we can, foster connections and promote people feeling safe. So the police people I spoke with said scams are huge. People need help in feeling safe and learning about online scamming. That was an issue that came up. People really want to have an opportunity to document and publicize the location of available bathrooms around Newton is another issue. I know in Brookline at one point, they had something called Where to Go When You Need to Go. So something along those lines would be a really useful resource. And lighting, and sidewalk, improving sidewalks was another big issue where I think people could come together and make improvements. So I think those are the main issues that we covered. And again, read the report because we go into greater detail with that.
Thank you very much. Mary, is there anything you wanted to add? I just wanted to give you an opportunity to.
Sure, no, I thank everyone who was involved in gaining all this information and encourage people to read it. We'll have it up on our website tomorrow. We have hard copies available at the Cooper Center for folks, if that's the way they like information. There'll be a second presentation done for the greater public at the Drucker Auditorium on January 7th at 7 o'clock, which will be hybrid. It will be in person or on Zoom, and the team will be there in person to do that presentation. So we look forward to trying to get folks to come there. But I think there's so much information that can touch so many different departments and so many different organizations in the city. And over the coming months, I'll be really reaching out to kind of take those sections of the report and get that information out to these different organizations that I think can really benefit from it, and then residents as well.
Makes sense. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Oliver in 1 second. I just wanted to ask one first question, which is the participation in the survey seemed pretty substantial to me. I just wanted to ask, were you expecting more participation, less participation? Were you pleased with the amount of participation you got? I know you talked about the representative nature of it, but in terms of the amount of participants you had and the number of responses you had, were you pleased with that? Did you feel that it was enough to get an accurate representation?
Yes, in fact, I was very pleasantly surprised by the response. It is definitely probably the highest we've ever experienced in our working with other communities, especially for it being, being in January. I think it was, just, yes, I mean, very, very impressed, and absolutely plenty to do, the analysis that we needed to do. But I think more than anything, when I think about that, I think also just about the fact that you ask people for their opinion and their experiences, and they responded. That tells me something in terms of people's. I mean, I'm sure that they respond to lots of surveys, but for me, it was clearly people want to be heard about this issue, and that's encouraging in terms of thinking about people's enthusiasm.
Just like to say too,
I also wanted to say that when you read the report, there's a section on the focus groups and the interviews. I think those are really interesting, and you'll see quotes in there that are very compelling. And so I encourage you to read that section. I think Mignon was very farsighted, if you will, comparatively, by having us look at these, for example, the solo agers and the semi and newly retired. It was a very, very insightful conversation.
Thanks, go ahead.
Just a topic on surveys. I think it speaks volumes that we got such a large response from this survey, and I would just like to push that out to other departments and organizations that we did mail out physically. Caitlin, I think it was 5,000 surveys to folks. So it was available online. It was available at places where people could drop them off as well. But that kind of hard mailed out survey really did get a response from this large section of our population. So when people are thinking about doing different things to, if they want to get a really great response, they should try to consider that option, that still works for a lot of people.
All right, Councilor Oliver, then Farrell. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Don't forget me.
I got you, sir.
We could never.
Councilor Oliver's up, Councilor Farrell's on deck, and Councilor Baker, you're in the hole. Counselor Oliver?
so to speak, yeah. There's a lot, I know I kind of requested this a couple of days earlier, I'm glad I did. Because there is a lot here. There's a lot to take in. I guess I'm left with one question with two parts, I think. And that is beyond kind of the socialization of what we just went through, what you just took us through. What are you currently thinking, like, now, what's next? What do you like, how do you take this and act on it? Is I guess what I'm kind of curious about.
I think from my perspective, and I mentioned, I want to take this information and get it to folks, because I think not that people don't think about this population, of course they do, and these are the residents of Newton. Every department, every organization, every business have people who are aging. So I really want to take this information that's specific to our community and to older adult issues and just give them the data to say, like, if you want to serve your customers better, or if you want to know what people are struggling with or could use more of, here's information to do that, and let us help you as technical experts as well in how you can do that. So that we can keep creating age-friendly situations in the city to just make the city livable for everybody and more comfortable for folks. And as we see, they want to stay here. We want people to stay here. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for that. So I really am going to be pushing it out and being very vocal and taking it out to as many places as I can to try to just get the information out and get people's feedback as well, and hopefully hear other situations that we can work together.
And then in terms of, like, beyond the socialization of it, when you think about how this impacts your programs, your programming, the services you provide, how you're going to be utilizing, the Cooper Center, have you started to formulate, because I see a lot of recommendations in here that are directly, I mean, let's face it, a majority of what we just saw should impact some part of your programming and or services. Have you started to formulate how you're gonna action on those things when it comes to either establishing budgets, identifying, because there were some numbers in here like, hey, I would use, or I would take classes, I would, come into the Cooper Center, but I don't see the need, I don't understand what's going on there. Like, there are some really meaty things in there to be tackled, and I'm wondering if you've started to kind of formulate how you're gonna get at that.
I mean, certainly on the fringes, and as we move through this year, our physical space we're building, and we've got that project going on. As you all know, that there was a deputy director that was approved in our budget this year. That person will hopefully be on board within a couple of months. We're doing interviews now. So as we build that team, we're working on all these different issues, but I think awareness of what you mentioned of and this image, people have this image that senior centers or active living centers are for very needy, the frail, and people don't participate either because they don't see themselves as wanting to be in that group, or they don't want to take a service or a program away from someone they think who is less fortunate that is taking care of that. So I really think we need to offer, as we go forward, a variety of different things that are at a variety of different price points and a variety of different times of day that really speak toward what we already are, but now that we have this opportunity and these 43% of people who have never participated, this is going to be brand new for people. I mean, between COVID and the senior center being relocated for the last 2 years, this is a new entity. This is a great opportunity to get that out, and we're looking at ways to do that. What ways are our messaging going out? How is that being treated to people? People see the newsletter, but do we want to do a different publication that has a completely different spin on it and has more, articles that can help as well, and more focus on our programs and different ways we can do that. We're also planning on revamping our entire websites, because as people are going to be drawn to us as this building gets closer, I want them to see all new things, information in good ways, and that will lead them to other things that will help.
Great. And then I guess kind of and you talked a little bit about it, but I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit more into what I'll I mean, I think the numbers show that right now there's a gap between, right, I mean, the title of the work here was the needs assessment. It seems to me what's being provided doesn't align very well yet with the needs that are out there. Do you feel that you've got a preponderance of the right direction now from this in the sense of, you know, you heard and we're seeing in this report, want to be really clear about that. I mean, there are definitely, you know, unmet needs that were vocalized. Do you guys feel like you've kind of got that on the run now?
I think we're working toward whatever we can, but I think a lot of what we found in the study, which was interesting, was things the city had been planning for. You know, the out of hours, you know, the evening and weekend programs, the fitness offerings. You know, the new building has a full gymnasium, it has a walking track, it has, you know, we're gonna have hours and all of these hours. Transportation, some of the needs that came up specifically in the study were needing to get beyond the walls of Newton for, you know, different appointments or different social things or all sorts of things. That are things, we addressed some of those in our latest contract with GoGo. So when this was done, it was the NUMO system. So some of those changes have been made. So some of them are already in process and, you know, have been worked through, and we'll continue to work our way through it. And we're just happy to hear what people want. It's just such a great place to start and start having more conversations so we can see how that fits in.
Great, thanks, that's all I've got, Chair, appreciate it. And thanks again, everyone. There's a lot of great work here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor Farrell. Councilor Farrell.
Let me just reiterate that there is an extraordinary amount of information, very useful and some of it concerning, and nothing to me is and has been for a very long time more immediate and concerning than food insecurity. And I'm trying to understand in this one square here, just generally, how big a population that really is. You say 28% of both the financially insecure and financially secure have food insecurity. What is the population we're talking about? All 2,900 people or of a certain age?
Caitlin, do you have that just to clarify?
I do, yeah. So that is, we ask people about whether they believe they have the financial resources to meet their basic needs now. And 10% of survey respondents said no to that question. And that's about 177 people. And of those, that's where you see the higher rates of food insecurity. So people who have some financial security are also are more likely to be food insecure as well. And that's just the respondents.
That's, yeah, right, and I understand that. That's not the 2,900 universe. This is just a smaller group.
Yep.
I think it's pretty astounding in a city like Newton that we have 177 people times whatever.
Right.
Feeling food insecure. And that to me is something I hope we can work on, not over time, but more immediately. And what are your thoughts about doing something about that?
Financial insecurity itself, you know, beyond just food insecurity, is a big issue that we're seeing. And so we have a case manager on staff who's a social worker, and she meets with people regularly. And this is one thing that's at the top is not just food insecurity, there's economic insecurity of having issues with rent, homelessness. I mean, we are fortunate that we have several food pantries in the city. You know, we can try to collaborate with them as well and get the word out farther about what they do currently. You know, what we have a commodity foods program once a month that also gets food out to folks. But it's hard because sometimes people, you know, there is SNAP, which was food stamps, which a lot of people would qualify for, and that's an earned benefit, but a lot of people are hesitant to do it. So that kind of normalizing of that kind of thing is hugely helpful because it's there for people. You know, it's to help with this, and it just is something that people are hesitant to do.
Do you have enough support to really focus on that group? I mean, I guess anybody going hungry in Newton is just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, we have case management within, we're hiring this deputy director, and we're also having a lens of of this in their position, that they will help us focus on that. But we also have a wonderful Health and Human Services, department in Newton that also does a lot of work with, younger than 60, but also goes into, we collaborated just last week on a case that was an intergenerational family that was having struggles with rent. And so we have good supports, but it is a large issue and it is a large community, and always lots to be done there.
Is this group, and I know there's some confidentiality here, but is this group identifiable with somebody? So that they can be specifically approached, encouraged, educated?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Specifically with the food insecurity piece, I don't know if we could pinpoint that. There are certainly organizations that are dealing with people who are food insecure that we could do a better job of getting them our information as well. Because if we can help them with another need, that frees up more money in their budget for food. But the striking comment that I think Kaylin said about, and Kaylin, tell me, I'm going to say this wrong, but the percentage of people who are making under $50,000 a year and living within this community
24%.
is high, and is a challenge.
I agree with all of that. There's a lot in it. It's just somebody going hungry is beyond me. If there's any way to, and as you say, a lot of those people aren't willing to take advantage of things like the food banks and so forth. So how do we get around that and get for them and get them what they need?
And we have a lot of resources, which is wonderful. But there's always challenge there. And I think when different organizations are thinking of their policies and how people access benefits, that the least barriers you can put in front of it, the better. Because the more you need to do all these financial forms, or we need copies of this and we need copies of that, the least likely people are to reach out and take it. So, finding creative ways to offer these kind of services without the stigma attached to them. And just, I think it's kind of like I think mental illness is something that's become more normalized in the last, many years. And that's because people are talking about it more. People are saying they go to the therapist, or they're reaching out for help. And I think any social service like that area, if people talk about it more and know that their neighbor is also struggling, or know that their neighbor is participating over here, and that is something maybe they'll access because they know someone else is.
Just, and not to drag on, but just, are there programs in Newton where you don't have to fill out a form? So if you say I'm hungry, you can get food?
I don't know the food pantries enough to comment on how their methods are. I know they all have different methods.
Mignon, this is Caitlin. I have a question about the new center. I assume there's going to be meal programs at the Cooper Center.
There is a beautiful commercial kitchen being built. The food program has not been finalized yet of what that will look like.
Okay.
But it's, there's a full walk-in fridge and freezer and setup, and also room in that kitchen to do cooking classes and things like that, which is also helpful ways to pass on information about how you can make the most with the food that you do have.
Great. I also just think sometimes the communal going to have lunch with others in a communal setting can sort of reduce some of the stigma in terms of getting people a stable meal and potentially connecting them with other food resources.
I think that's true, except that you are saying on one hand that a lot of people with this issue don't want to show it.
Well, but this,
And
what Caitlin's saying
You
is,
just came to a lunch. Yeah.
I hear what you said. Yeah. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Ewing, do you want to weigh in on that food insecurity?
Just very, very quickly, Mignon, hit many of the key points. I think if you're ever here on a Wednesday or Thursday during the day, those of us who are here see hundreds and hundreds of people coming to this food pantry. And this is just one of 3 food pantries in the city. And a decent percentage of them are older adults, for sure. And it's real. And here in Newton, it's sizable. We do, in terms of services, we do piggyback. Our Health and Human Services team does interact with the food pantry team to help identify families or adults, older adults in need of further services. So we do try to make sure it is a good way of identifying people who have food insecurity may also have other issues that need attention. So we're all trying to work together on these challenges.
Thank you. I need to educate myself more about what is going on, but thank you for saying.
I can say that my whole family volunteers at the food pantry regularly, and every time they volunteer, they come home and they're like, it was so busy, it was so, I can't believe how many people came, and so they share your.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Counselor Baker, I don't know if you're there. Counselor Baker may have had to step away. Counselor Baker, you are.
I'm here. I just have to put the phone down periodically. It's very, very comprehensive and quite substantial. I had a couple of comments. I think as I heard the presentation, there are sort of three categories of things that seniors can benefit from. And I think I am actually the most senior member of this committee, not only in years of service, but age. But Councilor Farrell and I can fight over the honor. But but I'm reminded, my physician once said that old is 20 years older than you are, whatever it is. So I think that part of what I'm curious about is how you all reach the population, and including people like me who are sort of, I've just been having the benefit of being on an iPhone, taking a look at the website. And some of the things that you've talked about are not easy to find on our city website. If you have a trash problem or a zoning problem or things like that, but the elder services are not as prominent. And it seems to me there are three categories that I heard you talk about. One is information, so that people can be informed about things they don't know about that are important. Second are services that they can access but don't necessarily need on a regular basis. And the third is the activities of the senior center. And a lot of the conversation focused on the activities of the senior center, but I think the first two are really opportunities for enhanced service. And I would encourage you to return to the committee at some point in the future, perhaps as part of your budget presentation, but maybe independently, and talk about how you build on this report in those first two categories. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Counselor Baker. Counselor Malky.
So I guess this is for, the UMass people. I was curious if, there were, I guess the 5,000 postcards sent out, and what was the response rate on that? Was that the 59% that you were talking about?
Yeah, so there were 5,000 surveys, also postcards. So the first thing we did was mail a postcard to everyone in that 5,000 sample of people saying, you're going to be asked to do a survey. Here's the information about it. Here's the different ways you can complete it. And then they also received a paper version of the survey about a week later that included a cover letter from the city sort of explaining what this was about and why it was important. And it was also made available online to residents of really anyone, any age that could find it. And so we put that out, and there was also paper copies made available throughout the city. And that the percent response rate is based on the number that we received out of the 5,000.
Does it include the ones that sort of found it online?
It does. It does. So the true response rate, Claire might have that on hand somewhere. I don't know. I might have it in my notes. It was still very impressive.
Was it 57%?
Well, that was the total response rate.
What percent were paper versus online, I think is the question, or close to the question.
I was just wondering if you can, if the responses were segregated between the sort of ones from what I would consider, I guess, the random sample of 5,000 people versus responses that came in from people who self-selected to respond.
Yep. Yeah, about 53% of surveys came back to us by mail. And
so those were 8 people who got the paper ones mailed to them.
Yeah.
As opposed to picking it up somewhere.
Right, and 47% did it online. Now, it's possible that someone who received it by mail decided to do it online as opposed to mailing it back in. That was an option, so it's a little hard to tell if there
I
was.
got the original postcard and I can't remember which way I filled it out.
Right. So there was the option for people who received the mailing, there was the option to do it online. So it's not a, there is overlap there. And then in terms of the, yeah, so of the 5,000, at least 1,300 of them came back paper. So you still had over 20% response rate of the paper surveys. But I think, are you suggesting perhaps that people online had different responses than people who
Well,
received?
yeah, I guess it seems like there might be a greater preponderance of people who sort of heard about it and decided to respond without being invited specifically, that are responding because they have concerns and have,
Sure.
need help in more ways. And whereas the random response might have been somewhat different, but it sounds like everybody got intermingled in terms of their response, the actual.
In the analysis that we shared this evening, yes, it was people who responded in any way to the survey.
And how did people get to be in a focus group?
They were personally invited. No, I think, go ahead. Kathy's shaking her heads at me. I'm just joking. We worked together.
Sorry,
Kathy,
I worked with Mignona and she did a brilliant job. She put out an email to people and used other resources. You can explain.
And Kathy, can you just recap the type of focus groups when we did the solo ager group?
We did one for people who were solo agers, and we sent people were received an email about this focus group and solicited their interest in responding and defined what a solo ager was or what a semi-retired, newly retired person was. And then we also interviewed people who were Russian speaking, people who were Chinese speaking. And we did what we call a stakeholder focus group of people who represented organizations throughout the city.
And was there one in public housing as well?
Well,
that was
the focus groups that focused on people who were Russian speaking and people who were Chinese speaking took place in different senior housing settings.
The solo agers and semi-retired were most self-selecting. I kind of put it in our newsletter, put it out there. And within, I think, a day or 2 days, we had people who didn't know who were wanting to come and participate in the group. One of them happened here at City Hall, and one of them happened at Brigham House, with those two. And it was, I always find it great when it's people we don't know. I love people we know, but to, something that catches the attention and, just, they were looking at our material, they saw that and they came here, and they may not have come to anything else, but they're at least getting that information.
It just seemed like some of they were like single digit numbers, so they seem like really small. I guess the point of a focus group is to be small, but it seemed like a very small sample of the universe of people in that category.
Yeah, and the ones, Kathy, I'm sure you have the numbers of how many were in each. I think it was about a dozen each in the solo agers, the semi-retired, and I think some of the language based ones were smaller groups.
Yeah, I mean, generally focus groups are designed for anywhere from 6 to 12 people. And their purpose is really just to generate conversation and ideas around some key questions. Not necessarily to be representative of everyone's experience, but we then use that to sort of add texture to, in this case, in these cases, some of the issues that are more prevalent in the city.
Yeah. There's about 53 participants across the groups in total.
We got a great response from the focus group for organizational leaders. There were 23 people there, a very large group at City Hall. Yeah.
The focus groups for Russian speakers and Chinese speakers, would that be Mandarin? Yes.
Yes, Mandarin.
Were they conducted in the language or
Yes, yes.
they included people who only spoke that language, or were they people?
No, I mean, primarily, there were people whose first and primary language was either Russian or English. They really are not people who use English to any great extent. If
And
they
were
do,
They were from the general population, not people, just people who lived in public housing and were Russian speakers or Chinese speakers.
no, they were people who were living in senior housing, yeah.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't sort of capturing the general population of people who spoke Russian.
No, we looked at places where there was a high concentration of people who spoke Russian or spoke Chinese, and we piggybacked, we collaborated with the resident services staff in order to invite people to participate.
And there was a mention of sort of the number of different languages that, other than Chinese and Russian, that people spoke. That was quite an amazing number of languages. And
Well, I think what we said was there were 70, when we asked people where their country of origin was, and there were over 70 countries represented.
yeah, and is there any way to sort of capture that population? Or encourage them to participate, like in the Cooper Center or programs?
Well, I mean, and there are recommendations within the report that are targeted to sort of increasing the diversity of participation.
Yeah, and I think there's no way, there's no way to sort of say, okay, who speaks the language other than English at home, and then identify them and send them a mailing or something like that. But I do think, and Kathy mentioned that we had 23 participants in the stakeholder group, and there are a number of organizations and faith communities in the area that do work closely with those populations and can be great partners to Mignon and others in terms of programming and just sort of brokering relationships between the Cooper Center and what they're doing. I think what we've learned in our work from other communities is just that it requires a lot of trust that has to be built over time. And also I think the languages, in the countries of origin, a lot of that those are not people that don't also speak English in terms of their first language. So it was just in terms of, I think the language access piece is important, but it's also the sort of cultural piece as well. So.
I think another interesting thing we learn across all of the assessments we do is that people go to other councils, other senior centers, that people don't, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, so there may be people whose primary language is not English and they go to Malden, for example, or they go to Boston, or, and they find what they need there. And, Mignon and her crew can learn from all of those experiences, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything at each senior center has to be duplicated. But I think, it's so interesting to learn where people go to get the information and the resources. And it's not always, it's not always to the senior center.
Yeah. I will just say too, and this speaks to a comment that was made earlier, just one of the threads throughout this is the need for people to identify with the center, or to sort of see themselves there, or see themselves benefiting from participation in some way. And I think that all of that speaks to the real opportunity that you all have with the Cooper Center in terms of messaging and branding, and sort of putting forth what is the Cooper Center and what is it meant to be for the community. And so it's an opportunity to think about all of these different groups of people and think about, where can they see themselves here, and creating an inclusive space.
Well, I think once you open, I think the evening programs and weekend programs, and, if you have events that are sort of interest to more than seniors, I think it'll draw more people in, whether it's, concerts or, some type of musical performance or lectures or things like that. Kind of the way we have at the library, but now we'll have another location. And for, I think, yeah, just wanted to mention, I've already heard concern about the cost of GoGo versus what it used to be for Numo. So I assume we'll be getting some kind of, will there be a sort of a survey specifically of GoGo users or non-users as we come up to, when we get to like a year of experience or so?
We're evaluating it as we go. It was always the intention that this was a new service, and we went into it conservatively, and we were going to, evaluate both the planning department and older adult services and the executive office to say, where are we at? What more can we do? Is this working? And we hear everyone's feedback, and it's wide ranging. But cost is certainly a factor, but there's already some changes that will be coming that just GoGo hasn't implemented on there and yet, so we have not put out there. But within the next month, you should see the first wave of how we're trying to improve and make it more accessible to people.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other councilors with their hands up. I share Councilor Baker's desire to hear more, in a few months, several months, that could be part of the budget process. So no action necessary would be appropriate, or hold if we want to do that, but I think no action necessary, we can file something for an updated vote. But
I'd be happy to motion for no action necessary.
Councilor Oliver has moved no action necessary. Any discussion on that? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Right,
I think Councilor Baker, you were an aye, correct?
yes, no, I was a little slow on the gadget. Yeah.
Abstentions? All right, that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the fantastic information.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Final item of the evening,
Want to take your last one?
item 473-24. This is the reappointment of Despina Felice to the Biosafety Committee.
I'll move approval.
Humphrey has moved approval. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? 8-0 is approved. Thank you. That concludes our agenda this evening. With that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.